You know that feeling when you walk into a room and completely forget why you went there? That split second of confusion where your mind goes blank and you're standing there like an idiot trying to remember? Now imagine that happening every single day, multiple times. But instead of forgetting why you entered a room, you're forgetting entire conversations, faces of people you just met, even chunks of your own life. That was my reality for 3 months in 2019, and I'm only now brave enough to talk about what was really happening. Before you click away thinking this is just another creepypasta, I need you to understand something. I have medical records, police reports. 7 other people in my apartment building experienced the same thing. But nobody wants to talk about it because admitting what happened means admitting that sometimes, just sometimes, the world doesn't work the way we think it does. It started in September when I moved into the Millbrook Station apartments in Portland. Not Oregon, Maine, the other Portland that nobody remembers exists. The building used to be an old train depot back in the 1920s, converted into apartments in the 80s. Red brick, those huge industrial windows, exposed pipes that the landlord called character, but really just meant he was too cheap to cover them up. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, Unit 3C, right at the end of the hallway where the old ticket office used to be. The first week was normal. Unpacking boxes, figuring out which light switches controlled what, learning that the radiator clanged like someone was hitting it with a hammer every night at exactly 11:47 p.m. I even made friends with my neighbor Marcus, this guy in his 50s who worked night shifts at the hospital and always had grocery bags full of those microwave dinners. We'd chat in the hallway about normal stuff like the weather, the Patriots, how the super never fixed anything on time. But then the gaps started. It was subtle at first. I'd be watching Netflix and suddenly realize I had no memory of starting the episode. Not like I zoned out, but like someone had edited that moment out of my life entirely. Clean cut. Nothing there. I'd check my phone and 20 minutes had passed. The episode was almost over. My coffee cup that had been full was now empty and cold. I blamed it on stress from the move, maybe not eating enough, definitely not sleeping enough. But then it got worse. I'd find myself in the middle of conversations with no memory of how they started. My coworker Amy would be mid-sentence about some project deadline, and I'd have to pretend I knew what she was talking about while my brain scrambled to fill in the blanks. I started carrying a notebook, writing everything down obsessively. Meeting at 2 p.m., dentist appointment Thursday, mom's birthday next week. The notebook became my lifeline, but even that started failing me. I'd find entries in my own handwriting that I didn't remember making. Check the basement at midnight. He watches through the walls. Don't trust the woman in 4B. That last one really messed with me because I'd never even seen anyone go in or out of 4B, and when I asked Marcus about it, he said that apartment had been empty for months. One night in October, I woke up standing in my kitchen at 3:17 a.m., not sleepwalking groggily, but fully awake, fully dressed, holding my car keys. The front door was open. My shoes were muddy even though it hadn't rained in a week. There was dirt under my fingernails, like I'd been digging in the ground. The worst part? When I checked my phone, I had 17 missed calls from Marcus and a text that just said, "Where did you go?" I called him back immediately. He answered on the first ring, and his voice was shaking. He told me I'd knocked on his door at 2 a.m., completely calm, and asked if he wanted to see something incredible in the basement. He said my eyes looked wrong, like I was looking through him instead of at him. When he said he had work in the morning, I apparently just smiled and said, "You won't need work where we're going," and walked away. He'd been calling me ever since. The basement. My notebook mentioned the basement. But here's the thing about Millbrook Station Apartments. We didn't have basement access. There was a basement, sure. You could see the windows at ground level, all painted black from the inside. But the door was in the super's office, and he'd told everyone during move-in that it was just old storage, structural damage, insurance liability, all the usual excuses to keep people out. So how did I have mud on my shoes? Where had I been for that missing hour? And why did I have this overwhelming feeling that I'd been there before, many times, even though I had no memory of it? The next morning, I did something that, looking back, was probably stupid, but when you're losing chunks of your life, desperate moves start seeming logical. I went to the super's office. Gary was his name, this heavy guy in his 60s who always wore the same green flannel regardless of the season. His office smelled like cigarettes even though there were no smoking signs everywhere, and he had this way of looking at you like you were interrupting something important even when he was just sitting there doing crossword puzzles. I told him about the missing time, the muddy shoes, finding myself places with no memory of getting there. I expected him to laugh or tell me to see a doctor, but instead, his face went pale. Actually, pale, like someone had drained the color right out of him. He set down his pencil real slow and asked me which apartment I was in again. When I said 3C, he closed his eyes and muttered something that sounded like, "Not again." That's when he told me about the previous tenants. Not just the last one, but going back years, decades even. People in 3C never stayed more than 6 months. They all complained about the same things, missing time, finding themselves in strange places, and every single one of them eventually became obsessed with the basement. He pulled out this old filing cabinet, the metal kind that squeaks when you open it, and showed me letters, complaints, police reports going back to 1987. Patricia Henley, 1987, found by police wandering the train tracks at 4 a.m. with no memory of leaving her apartment. James Wu, 1993, quit his job and disappeared after telling coworkers that they were teaching him things in the basement. Sarah and Tom Morrison, 2001, broke their lease after Sarah was found digging in the courtyard with her bare hands, insisting someone was buried there. The list went on. 15 tenants, all with the same pattern, all from apartment 3C. Gary lit a cigarette right there in the office, not even trying to hide it anymore, and told me I should move out, find somewhere else, break the lease. He wouldn't fight it. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said the last tenant, a guy named Daniel, had left 6 months ago, but before he did, he'd broken into the basement. Gary had found the lock cut, the door wide open, and Daniel's belongings scattered all over down there, like he'd been living in the basement for weeks without anyone knowing. The belongings were still there. Gary hadn't wanted to go back down to clean them out. I should have left right then, packed my stuff, stayed with my parents, found a new place. But there was this pull, like when you're standing on a high balcony and part of your brain whispers, "Jump," even though you'd never do it. I needed to know what was in that basement. The memory gaps were getting worse. I'd lost most of Tuesday. Woke up Wednesday afternoon with dirt in my hair and my laptop open to a Word document filled with nothing but the phrase, "They remember everything," repeated for 30 pages. That night, I set up my phone to record video while I slept. I know how that sounds, like every found footage horror movie ever, but I needed proof that something was happening. I wasn't crazy. The other tenants weren't crazy. Something in this building was taking pieces of us, and I was going to figure out what. I woke up at 11:47 p.m. to the radiator clanging. My phone was still recording, propped up on the dresser facing the bed. I was about to stop it and check the footage when I noticed something. My bedroom door was open. Not wide open, just cracked, maybe 6 inches. But I distinctly remembered closing and locking it before bed. I'd developed this whole ritual. Door locked, chair under the doorknob, phone recording. The chair was now neatly placed back by my desk. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and scrubbed back through the video. 10 p.m. Me getting into bed. 10:47 p.m. The radiator starts its nightly performance. 11:15 p.m. I sit up in bed, eyes open, but clearly not awake. I watch myself get up, move the chair with practiced ease like I'd done it 100 times, unlock the door, and walk out. But that's not the worst part. At 11:33 p.m., I come back, but I'm not alone. There's someone behind me, just out of frame, only visible as a shadow. They follow me into the room, stand at the foot of my bed for exactly 3 minutes, then leave. I put the chair back, lock the door, and get back into bed like nothing happened. I was still processing this when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, stopping right outside my door. The doorknob turned. The lock held, but the doorknob kept turning, back and forth, like someone was testing it. Then I heard a voice, my voice, from the other side of the door saying, "I know you're awake. We need to finish what we started." I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I sat in the corner of my room with a baseball bat, watching the door, waiting for the sound of my own voice to come back. It never did. When sunlight finally crept through those huge industrial windows, I felt brave enough to venture out. The hallway was empty, normal, like nothing had happened. But there were muddy footprints leading from my door to the stairwell, my shoe size, my tread pattern. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching the building's history. The Portland Library had old newspapers on microfilm, the kind you have to scroll through on those ancient machines that make everything look yellow. What I found made me wish I'd never looked. The Millbrook station wasn't just a train depot. In the 1920s, the basement had been used as a temporary morgue during the Spanish flu outbreak. Bodies were stored there when the city morgue overflowed, sometimes for weeks before burial. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the series of articles from 1923 about the night watchman, Eugene Cray, who'd been caught performing what the papers called ungodly experiments on the bodies. The articles were vague, probably censored, but they mentioned something about Cray believing he could preserve memories after death, that consciousness could be extracted and stored. He'd been using some kind of early electromagnetic equipment, copper wires, glass containers filled with what he called essential salts. 7 bodies had gone missing before he was caught. He claimed he hadn't stolen them, that they'd walked out on their own, that he'd successfully captured their memories and could make them do things. Cray was institutionalized. The building was closed for 3 years before reopening as just a regular train station. But here's what made my skin crawl. In his testimony, Cray specifically mentioned that the process required a living conduit, someone whose mind was properly prepared through repeated exposure to the electromagnetic fields. He said the memories of the dead would slowly overwrite the conduit's own memories until there was room for them to walk again. I was still processing this when Marcus knocked on my door, but when I opened it, his face was wrong. Not physically different, but his expression was off, like someone wearing a Marcus mask who'd never quite learned how to use facial muscles properly. He asked if I wanted to see something interesting in the basement. Those exact words, the same words I'd apparently said to him. I slammed the door and locked it. Through the peephole, I watched him stand there for 5 minutes, perfectly still, not blinking, before turning and walking away. But here's the thing. Marcus walked with a limp from an old injury. This Marcus didn't limp. This Marcus moved like someone who'd forgotten what their body's limitations were supposed to be. That evening, around 7 p.m., I heard voices in the hallway. Multiple people, all talking at once, but all saying the same thing in perfect unison. We need to go to the basement. I looked through the peephole and saw 6 of my neighbors, including Marcus, standing in a circle right outside my door. Their eyes were vacant, looking at nothing, but they were all smiling. Then, in perfect synchronization, they all turned their heads to look directly at my door. I backed away from the peephole, and that's when I noticed my notebook was open on the kitchen table. In my handwriting, but fresh ink, still wet. Stop fighting. You've already been chosen. Eugene is waiting. I didn't write that. I hadn't been in the kitchen all day. But there it was, my handwriting, so perfect it could have been traced. Below it was a diagram of the basement, detailed, showing rooms I'd never seen, paths I'd never walked, and in the center, a room marked The Archive, with a note, "Where we keep the memories." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but somehow I knew it was from 4B, the apartment that was supposedly empty. It was a photo of me from what looked like last night, standing in the basement, surrounded by those glass containers Cray had written about. They were glowing with a faint blue light, and in each one I could see faces, dozens of faces, all pressed against the glass, all with their mouths open like they were screaming, and in the background, barely visible, was a figure in an old fashion suit, smiling at the camera. The text said, "You've been such a good conduit. Tonight, we finish the transfer." I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and my phone. I was leaving, getting out. I didn't care about my stuff, my lease, any of it. But when I opened my door, the hallway was full of people. Every single resident of the building was standing there, silent, all looking at me with those empty eyes. And at the far end, by the stairwell, was someone who looked exactly like me, down to the clothes I was wearing, smiling with my face. Have you ever seen yourself from the outside? Not in a mirror or a photo, but actually seen yourself standing there, moving independently, smiling with your face, but with someone else behind the eyes? It's wrong in a way that makes your brain refuse to process it. That thing wearing my face started walking toward me, and every single person in the hallway moved aside to let it pass, their heads turning in unison to track its movement like sunflowers following the sun. I ran, not toward the stairs where my doppelganger was coming from, but back into my apartment, slamming the door and pushing everything I could find against it. The couch, the bookshelf, the kitchen table. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip anything. But adrenaline is one hell of a drug. From the hallway, I heard my own voice, calm and patient. "This is unnecessary. You've already been inside. We've already shared so much." Inside. It said I'd already been inside. Inside what? Inside where? But even as I asked myself these questions, images started flooding my mind. Memories that weren't mine. A woman in a 1920s dress, crying over a small body. A man in a worker's uniform coughing blood into a handkerchief. Eugene Cray standing over a metal table, attaching copper wires to a corpse's skull. These weren't things I'd read about or imagined. These were memories, as vivid as my own, as real as my own. The pounding on the door stopped. Everything went quiet except for the sound of my own panicked breathing. Then I heard it, the radiator, clanging. But it was only 8:30 p.m. The radiator never clanged before 11:47. It was wrong, off schedule, broken pattern. And with each clang, more memories pushed into my head. Names of people I'd never met. streets in Portland that didn't exist anymore, the taste of medicines that hadn't been made in decades. I was losing myself, piece by piece, memory by memory. Something else was filling the space where I used to be. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but my recent calls list showed 17 outgoing calls to numbers I didn't recognize, all made in the last hour, while I'd been barricading the door, while I'd been alone in my apartment, or thought I was alone. That's when I saw the reflection in my phone's black screen, someone standing right behind me, but when I spun around, nobody was there, just my empty apartment and the furniture piled against the door. I looked back at the phone, and the reflection was still there. An old man in a brown suit, round glasses, thin mustache, Eugene Cray, looking exactly like the newspaper photos from 1923. He smiled in the reflection and mouthed words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "You're almost ready." The furniture against my door suddenly flew back like it had been hit by a truck. The door swung open, and there stood the thing wearing my face, flanked by my neighbors, all of them moving with that same wrongness, like puppets whose strings were being pulled by someone who'd forgotten how humans were supposed to move. "It's time," my doppelganger said, and its voice was my voice, but also wasn't, like multiple people speaking in unison through one mouth. "The archive needs its newest keeper." They grabbed me, Marcus, who I'd shared beers with, Mrs. Chen from 2A, who always gave me cookies during the holidays, Tom from downstairs who played his music too, loud, all of them with those empty eyes, those wrong movements, pulling me toward the hallway. I fought, kicked, screamed, but there were too many of them, and my body was starting to betray me. My left arm moved on its own, stopping my resistance. My legs started walking willingly, even as my mind screamed in protest. We went down the stairs, past the second floor, past the first, to a door I'd never noticed before. Old wood, painted the same color as the walls, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The super's keys were in my pocket, though I didn't remember taking them. My hand, moving without my permission, unlocked 3 separate locks. The door opened to reveal stairs going down into darkness that seemed too deep, too black, like it was eating the light from the hallway. The basement wasn't what I expected. It was bigger than the building above it, stretching out in impossible directions. The walls were brick, but older than the building, older than the train station, maybe older than Portland itself. Gas lamps that shouldn't have been working cast everything in a sick yellow light. And everywhere were those glass containers, hundreds of them, lining the walls, filled with that blue light and those faces, so many faces. In the center of the main room was a chair that looked like a dentist's chair had been merged with some kind of electrical equipment. Copper wires ran from it to every single container, creating a web that hummed with energy. And standing beside it, solid as any living person, was Eugene Cray. "Finally," he said, and his voice was exactly what you'd expect from a throat that had been dead for 100 years. "The new keeper has arrived. You've been preparing so beautifully. All those gaps in your memory, that was you making room for all of them." He gestured to the containers. "They've been waiting so patiently to be remembered properly." They strapped me into the chair, and I mean strapped. Leather restraints that looked like they'd been made when leather restraints were a common thing. My doppelganger stood to my left, still wearing my face, but now not even pretending to move like me. It moved like Cray, with his mannerisms, his posture, even the way he held his hands behind his back. Cray himself was attaching copper wires to my temples, humming some song I didn't recognize, but somehow knew was from 1919. The glass containers around us were glowing brighter, the faces inside pressed against the glass so hard I thought it might break. And I could hear them, not with my ears, but in my mind, dozens of voices all talking at once, telling me their names, their stories, how they died, what they wanted, what they needed. You see, Cray said, adjusting the wires, death is just a transition of storage. The body fails, yes, but memories, consciousness, the essential self that can be preserved, transferred, all it requires is a proper vessel. And every so often, we need a new vessel because the old ones, he gestured to my neighbors standing around us, they do wear out. Poor Marcus there is on his third body. Mrs. Chen is on her fifth. They've been so helpful in preparing you. The machine started humming, and my vision went white. Not black, not unconscious, but white like staring into the sun. And in that whiteness, I saw everything. Every person who died in this building during the flu pandemic. Every person Cray had experimented on. Every tenant who'd lived in 3C before me. They were all here, all preserved, all desperate to exist again. And they were pouring into me. Have you ever tried to hold water in your hands? How it runs through your fingers, no matter how tight you squeeze. That's what it felt like trying to hold on to my own memories, while hundreds of others flooded in. I remembered being a seamstress in 1918. I remembered being a rail worker in 1920. I remembered being Sarah Morrison in 2001, digging in the courtyard, because I knew there was something buried there. These weren't just memories anymore. They were becoming me. But here's the thing about desperate people, even dead desperate people. They fight each other. As all these memories tried to take hold, they started conflicting, overlapping, canceling each other out. The seamstress wanted to pray. The rail worker wanted to run. Sarah Morrison wanted to dig. And in that chaos, that confusion of 100 different people trying to be one person, I found a gap, a space that was still me. I focused on that space, on the memories that were definitively mine. My mom's laugh, the taste of coffee from the shop on Congress Street, the way my apartment smelled when I first moved in. Small things, stupid things, but undeniably mine. And I held on to them like a lifeline while the chaos raged around me. Cray was saying something about the process being almost complete, but his voice was distant, distorted. The machine was overheating. I could smell burning copper, melting insulation. The glass containers were glowing so bright they were hard to look at. And then one of them cracked. Just a small crack at first, spiderweb fractures spreading across the glass. The face inside pressed harder, mouth open in what might have been a scream or might have been desperate breathing. Then the container shattered. Blue light poured out like liquid, and with it, something else. A shape, translucent, human but not, standing there for a moment before dissipating like smoke. Then another container cracked. Another. The chain reaction was starting and Cray was panicking, running between containers, trying to stop what couldn't be stopped. No, no, no. The archive. You're destroying the archive. My doppelganger was convulsing, its face shifting between mine and others, features melting and reforming. The neighbors were screaming, but not with their voices, with voices of people who'd died decades ago. And I was still strapped to the chair, watching it all fall apart while memories that weren't mine slowly leaked out like air from a punctured balloon. The explosion started with the largest container in the back, the one that had been glowing brightest. When it went, it took out 3 others, sending glass and blue light everywhere. The copper wires sparked, caught fire, spread to the old wooden supports. The entire basement was coming apart, and Eugene Cray was trying to hold it together with hands that weren't really there, screaming about his life's work, his great experiment. That's when Marcus, the real Marcus somewhere deep inside the possessed version, managed to surface for just a moment. His eyes cleared, focused on me, and he stumbled forward to undo the straps. "Run!" he gasped in his actual voice. "Before we come back." I ran, up the stairs, through the door, past the empty hallways. I could hear the building groaning, the fire spreading through the old wood and insulation. I grabbed my car keys and nothing else, not even my phone. Behind me, I heard Cray's voice, not angry, but sad. "You could have been eternal. You could have remembered them all. The building didn't burn down. That would have been too clean, too final." The fire department arrived, contained the basement fire, blamed it on old wiring. The residents were evacuated, but most came back within a week, not remembering much about that night. Marcus doesn't remember helping me. Mrs. Chen makes cookies like nothing happened. The super hired someone to seal the basement door with concrete, but apartment 3C stays empty. The landlord doesn't even list it anymore. And sometimes, late at night, when I drive by the building, I can see lights in those blacked-out basement windows. Blue lights, moving like they're searching for something. I still have the gaps in my memory, still lose time occasionally. Last week, I found a notebook I don't remember buying with an address written in my handwriting. It's another old building, another converted something, another apartment 3C. The note underneath says, "The archive must continue." I burned the notebook, moved to a different state, changed my phone number. But every night at 11:47 p.m., wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, I hear it. That clanging, that rhythmic banging like someone's hitting metal with a hammer, or like someone's trying to get out of a container. The memories that weren't mine are mostly gone now, faded, like dreams you can barely remember. But sometimes, when I'm half asleep or not paying attention, I'll know things I shouldn't know. The name of a woman who died in 1919, the feel of copper wires against my temples, the taste of essential salts, and I know, deep down in a way that terrifies me, that Eugene Cray was right about one thing. Death is just a transition of storage, and somewhere, in some basement, in some building, the archive is being rebuilt, one memory at a time, one person at a time, and they'll keep looking for new keepers, new vessels, new people who move into the wrong apartment at the wrong time. So if you're apartment hunting and you find a great deal on a place that used to be something else, an old hospital, an old funeral home, an old anything, ask about the previous tenants, ask about the basement, and if they tell you apartment 3C is available, just walk away, because the archive never forgets, and neither do I, no matter how hard I try. Before you go to sleep tonight, do me a favor. Set an alarm for 11:47 p.m. When it goes off, listen carefully. If you hear clanging, rhythmic, and insistent, like someone trying to get your attention, don't investigate. Don't be curious. Just pack your things and leave. Trust me on this one. And hey, if you made it this far, you're braver than most. Hit that like button and subscribe, because tomorrow I'm sharing what happened to the woman in apartment 4B, the one everyone said was empty. Turns out, she never left. She's still there, waiting in the walls, and she's been leaving messages in the mirrors. But that's a story for another night. Sweet dreams, and remember, some memories are better left forgotten.